The dust clung to her dress like shame. Elowynn Cordell stood on the porch of Brackett's General Store in Sulphur Flats, Arizona, her 2 children tucked behind her skirt like frightened rabbits. The store owner, a thick-necked man named Gideon Brackett, held a sack of flour just out of her reach. "You owe me 3 months, woman," he said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. Elowynn's fingers trembled. She had no coin, no credit, no husband anymore. The sky above was the color of a bruise, and the wind smelled like iron and coming rain. That was when the stranger appeared. He rode in slow on a black mare, his hat pulled low, a scar running from his left ear to his jaw like a river on a map. His name was Cale Dunmore, though nobody in Sulphur Flats knew him yet. He dismounted without a word. His boots hit the dirt, and the sound was heavy, deliberate. He looked at Brackett. He looked at the flour. He looked at the woman whose pride was cracking in public like dry earth. Cale reached into his coat and placed $2 silver on the counter. "That cover it?" he asked. His voice was low and rough, like gravel dragged over stone. Brackett snatched the coins and shoved the flour toward Elowynn. She grabbed it and turned fast, pulling her children, 8-year-old Nettie and 5-year-old Soren, close. She walked 3 blocks before she stopped, breathing hard, and turned to the stranger who had followed at a distance. "Why did you do that?" she asked. He said nothing at first, just looked at her the way a man looks at something broken that he once knew whole. "You reminded me of someone," he finally said. Elowynn's jaw tightened. She did not want to be someone's ghost. "I can't pay you back," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady, the kind of steady that comes from years of swallowing fear. "I have no gold, no silver, no land." She paused. The children stared up at the tall, scarred man. "I can't pay you with gold," she whispered. "Only with myself." She meant labor, cooking, cleaning, mending fences. But the words hung in the dry air like something heavier. Cale's expression did not change. He did not smile. He did not leer. He simply nodded once. "I've got a ranch east of here. Roof leaks. Fences down. I could use the help." Elowynn studied him. Every instinct told her to run. Every experience with men had taught her that kindness was a trap, a door that locked from the outside. But Nettie was coughing again, and Soren hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She had buried her husband 4 months ago, not from illness, but from his own cruelty. Drank himself dead in a canyon, left her with nothing but bruises and debt. So she looked at this stranger with his scarred face and his quiet voice, and she made the only choice a mother with nothing can make. "When do we leave?" she asked, and the sky cracked open with thunder. Drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's continue the story. The ranch sat 2 hours east of Sulphur Flats, carved into a valley between red rock mesas that rose like the walls of a cathedral. The house was small, 3 rooms, a stone fireplace, and a porch that sagged on one side like a tired old man. The barn leaned. The fence posts were split and scattered, but the well had clean water, and the land smelled like sage and wildflowers after the rain. Elowynn stood at the gate with her children and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly, more like the absence of dread. And for her, that was close enough. Cale showed them the house without ceremony. He had cleared one room for them, swept the floor, laid fresh straw under a wool blanket, and placed a small wildflower in a jar on the windowsill. Elowynn stared at that flower for a long time. It was a purple prairie clover. Her mother used to grow them. She said nothing, but her throat ached. Nettie ran her fingers along the blanket. Soren pressed his face against the window glass. "It's so quiet here," Nettie whispered. She was right. The silence was enormous. No shouting, no breaking glass, no man stumbling through the door smelling like whiskey and rage. That first night, Elowynn couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch with a tin cup of water, watching the stars. She had forgotten how many there were, away from town. They looked like salt scattered across black cloth. Cale came outside once, carrying firewood. He saw her and stopped. "You need anything?" he asked. She shook her head. He nodded and went back inside. That was it. No lingering, no testing boundaries, no eyes that made her feel small. She sat there another hour, and for the first time in years, her shoulders dropped. The tension she had carried like armor began, slowly, to loosen. But later, as she lay on the straw, mattress with her children pressed against her, she heard something through the wall. Cale's voice, low and murmured, speaking words she couldn't make out. She held her breath. It sounded like a conversation, tender, broken, the way a man talks to someone he loves. Then she heard something else, a second voice, faint and soft, like wind sliding through a crack in the wood. A woman's voice. Or maybe not. Maybe just the house settling. Elowynn's skin prickled. She pulled her children closer and stared at the ceiling until dawn. She told herself it was nothing, but her hands didn't stop shaking until morning. Over the next week, Elowynn worked. She patched the roof with pitch and canvas. She rehung the barn door. She cooked beans and cornbread and rabbit stew that made Cale eat in silence, eyes wide. He never praised her with words, but he left extra firewood by the stove each morning. He carved a small wooden horse for Soren. He fixed a shelf in her room without being asked. These were not words. They were sentences written in wood and nails and quiet effort. Elowynn noticed everyone, but she didn't trust them yet. Trust was a bone broken too many times to heal straight. One evening, Nettie asked Cale why he lived alone. The question came fast, the way children speak before fear teaches them silence. Cale was sharpening a blade by the fire. His hand stopped. "I had a family once," he said. "A wife, a daughter. They got sick the winter of '79. Fever took them both in the same week." He paused. "I buried them under the cottonwood tree out back." Nettie looked toward the window where the tree stood black against the moon. "Do you talk to them?" she asked. Cale's jaw tightened. "Every night," he said, and Elowynn's blood went cold. The murmured voice through the wall. It was him, talking to the dead. 2 weeks passed. Elowynn began to breathe differently. Her movements loosened. She laughed once, actually laughed, when Soren chased a chicken and fell, face first, into mud. Cale watched from the barn door with something in his eyes that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. He was not a man who smiled easily. His face had forgotten how, but his hands remembered kindness. He built Nettie a small desk from scrap wood so she could practice her letters. He showed Soren how to whistle through a blade of grass. In a world starved of tenderness, small things are mountains. Then Brackett came. He rode up on a Tuesday with 2 men flanking him like shadows. Elowynn was hanging laundry when she saw the dust cloud. Her whole body went rigid, the way prey freezes before the strike. Brackett dismounted with a grin that showed too many teeth. "Mrs. Cordell, your husband owed me $60 for whiskey and supplies. That debt doesn't die with the man. He looked at the ranch, then at Cale, who had stepped onto the porch holding a rifle loose at his side. Then Brackett's eyes drifted past the house, past the barn, toward the creek that cut through the valley floor. He stared at it the way a man stares at something he's already decided to take. "She doesn't owe you a thing," Cale said. Low, even, like a river before it floods. Debts die with the debtor unless there's a signed contract. Brackett's smile flickered. "I have a signed contract." "Then show it," Cale said. Brackett produced a folded paper from his saddlebag. Cale took it and read it slowly. His eyes stopped on one line. He handed it to Elowynn. "Look at the signature," he said quietly. She did. The handwriting wasn't her husband's. It was forged, and she knew whose hand had written it. The wind died. Even the sky seemed to hold still. Brackett's grin disappeared. "That contract is legal," he snapped. "It's a forgery," Elowynn said, and her voice didn't shake. "Not this time. My husband could barely write his own name. This signature has flourishes he never learned." Brackett's face reddened. "This isn't over," he said, mounting his horse. "I'll be back with the sheriff." He rode off in a cloud of dust. Elowynn watched him go, heart hammering. Cale stood beside her, saying nothing, but she felt it, the solid weight of someone who would not leave, and for the first time, she let that feeling stay. That night, Elowynn told Cale about her husband. Harlan Cordell had been a beautiful liar. When they married, she was 17 and believed love could be earned through obedience. She was wrong. Harlan drank. Harlan gambled. Harlan hit. Not always with fists, sometimes with words that left bruises nobody could see. He told her she was worthless so often she started to believe it, the way a river believes the shape of its canyon. When he died alone in that ravine, bottle in hand, she felt nothing. Not grief, not relief, just a vast, terrible emptiness where a life should have been. Cale listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet a long time. The fire popped and sent sparks drifting upward like tiny prayers. "My wife's name was Josefa," he said. "She was Tohono O'odham. Her family didn't want her marrying me, but she was stubborn in the way wild flowers are stubborn, grew wherever she chose." His voice cracked. "Our daughter Paloma had her mother's eyes, dark and wide and full of questions." He stared into the flames. "I wasn't there when the fever came. I was selling horses in town. By the time I got back, they were burning up. I held them 3 days. It wasn't enough." Elowynn felt tears on her cheeks but didn't wipe them. She understood now why the ranch felt the way it did, like a place where love had lived and died, and left fingerprints on every wall. The cottonwood tree wasn't just a tree, it was a headstone. The wildflower in the jar wasn't decoration, it was a conversation. Cale had built his life around grief the way a pearl forms around a wound, layer by layer, year by year, until the pain became something beautiful and hard. She reached across and placed her hand on his. He flinched, then he didn't pull away. The next morning, before the sun cleared the mesas, Elowynn walked to the cottonwood tree alone. She had never gone there before. It felt like trespassing on holy ground. 2 small wooden crosses stood side by side in the shade, the names carved deep: Josefa and Paloma. Elowynn stood there for a long time. She didn't know what to say, so she said the only thing she could. "Thank you for sharing him." Then she pulled a purple prairie clover from the garden and laid it gently between the graves. She didn't know Cale was watching from the kitchen window, but he was, and he had to turn away because he couldn't see through the tears. That afternoon, A rider came from town carrying a sealed letter from Gideon Brackett, addressed to the territorial judge. It requested a hearing to enforce Elowynn Cordell's debt, claiming Elowynn had fraudulently fled her obligations. The hearing was set for Friday. 3 days. Elowynn read the letter twice, then set it on the table with trembling hands. Cale picked it up. "He's bluffing," he said. But his eyes said something else. They said, "He's dangerous." And in a territory where judges could be bought with whiskey and promises, danger wore a legal face. Elowynn spent the next 2 days preparing, not with lawyers, she couldn't afford one, but with truth. She dug through the canvas sack she had carried from Sulphur Flats and found 3 things: a letter Harlan had written to his brother, barely legible, proving his near illiteracy; a receipt from Brackett's store showing Harlan's mark, an X, not a signature, and a Bible with their marriage record inside, where Harlan had signed with that same shaky X. 3 pieces of paper, 3 small weapons against a man with money and influence. She spread them on the table like a general studying a battlefield. Cale rode into town alone on Wednesday. He didn't tell Elowynn where he was going. He visited the assayer's office, the land registry, and the saloon where Harlan used to drink. He asked careful questions and bought quiet drinks. By sundown, he had learned 2 things. First, Brackett didn't just want the debt. He wanted the water rights running through the valley where Cale's ranch sat. Harlan had unknowingly homesteaded a claim bordering Brackett's cattle operation. It was never about flour. It was about water. In the desert, water was gold. And the second thing Cale learned would change everything. In the saloon, an old vaquero named Paz told Cale something over his 3rd whiskey. Brackett wasn't always a devil, Paz said. 2 summers ago, drought killed half his herd, nearly lost everything. He's been buying up water claims since. Desperate men do desperate things. Cale sat with that. It didn't make Brackett less dangerous. It made him more so. A greedy man can be satisfied. A desperate man cannot. And Paz told him one more thing. There was a woman who cleaned Brackett's store at night. A woman named Teodora Vega. A woman who saw things and who had been too afraid to speak. Thursday night. The children were asleep. Elowynn sat rewriting her statement, handwriting careful and clear. Cale sat across from her, cleaning his rifle. The air was thick with everything unsaid. Finally, she looked up. "If we lose, I'll have to leave. Take the children somewhere Brackett can't reach." Cale set the rifle down. "You won't lose." "But if I did, where would I go?" She shook her head. "Somewhere without men who think they own women." Cale nodded slowly. "If that place exists," he said, "I hope it has a ranch that needs fixing." She almost smiled. Almost. The morning of the hearing arrived wrapped in fog. Sulphur Flats looked ghostly, buildings half swallowed by white mist. The courthouse was a single room above the post office, with a judge named Ephraim Slade, who had a reputation for fairness when sober and cruelty when drunk. Elowynn entered in her cleanest dress, children walking behind her with scrubbed faces. Brackett was already there with a lawyer from Tucson, a thin man with spectacles and a briefcase that clicked open like a trap. The room smelled of tobacco and old wood. 20 people had come to watch. The whole town was hungry for someone else's suffering. Brackett's lawyer presented the contract first, voice smooth, calling Elowynn a debtor fleeing obligations, calling her arrangement with Cale suspicious. Her hands shook under the table. Then it was her turn. She stood alone and laid her 3 documents before the judge: the letter, the receipt, the Bible. My husband could not write his name, Your Honor. The signature on that contract belongs to someone who can." The room went quiet. Judge Slade leaned forward, lifted his spectacles, and compared the documents. Brackett's jaw muscles twitched. The fog pressed against the window like the whole world was holding its breath. Slade studied the papers for what felt like an hour. The silence hummed in everyone's bones. Finally, he looked at Brackett. "This signature does not match the deceased's known mark." Brackett stood fast, chair scraping the floor like a scream. "That woman is a liar." The judge slammed his gavel. "Sit down." But Brackett didn't sit. His face was red, veins thick at his temples. His lawyer touched his arm. Brackett shook him off. "I have witnesses," he snarled. "Men who saw Harlan sign that contract." And the door at the back of the room opened. Cale walked in. Behind him came a small, hunched woman named Theodora Vega, the woman who cleaned Brackett's store every night. 60 years old, hair white as bone, eyes sharp as needles. She had seen Brackett forge the signature himself, late one night after Harlan died, pressing the pen with his left hand to disguise his writing. She had been too afraid to speak, until now. Kyle guided her to the witness chair. She sat with hands folded, voice shaking but clear. "I saw him write it," she said, pointing at Brackett. "I saw him sign a dead man's name." The courtroom erupted. Brackett lunged toward Theodora, but 2 men grabbed him. His lawyer backed away like the briefcase had caught fire. Elowynn stood frozen, heart pounding in her fingertips. Nettie squeezed her hand. Soren pressed into her skirt. Judge Slade slammed the gavel 3 times. "Mr. Brackett, you are charged with forgery and fraud. This debt is dismissed. The claim stands with Mrs. Cordell." Brackett's face went white, then gray, then twisted into something desperate. "This isn't finished," he whispered. Outside, the fog burned off, and sunlight hit the town like a revelation. Cale stood at the bottom of the steps, holding the mayor's reins. He didn't say congratulations. He said, "Ready to go home?" And the word home hit her chest like a church bell. But the day wasn't done. As they rode back, Nettie spotted smoke, a column of black, greasy smoke rising from the valley. Cale whipped the mare into a gallop. Elowynn held Soren tight. When they crested the ridge, they saw it. The barn was on fire. Flames climbed the old wood like living things, orange and furious. Cale jumped from the horse before it stopped. He ran toward the barn, then froze. Painted on the ranch house wall in black tar were 2 words: "Not finished." Brackett's men had come while they were gone, and the fire was spreading toward the house where the cottonwood tree stood guard over 2 small graves. Cale didn't hesitate. He ran to the well, hauling bucket after bucket, arms burning, lungs full of smoke. Elowynn was right beside him, hauling water with bare hands blistered from the rope. Nettie soaked blankets and beat flames back from the porch. Even Soren carried a small pail, face streaked with tears and soot. They fought, not like strangers, like a family. The barn was lost, but the house survived, and the cottonwood tree, Josefa and Paloma's tree, stood untouched, its branches swaying in the smoky wind as if waving the fire away. When it was over, they collapsed in the yard, covered in ash and breathing hard. The silence afterward was enormous. Smoke drifted across the stars. Elowynn sat with her back against the porch, too tired to move. Nettie leaned against her shoulder, already half asleep. And then Soren did something no one expected. He crawled across the dirt and climbed into Cale's lap. It was the first time he had done this. Cale froze. The boy looked up at him with wide, soot-streaked eyes and asked, "Are we your family now?" Cale couldn't speak. His throat locked. He just wrapped his arms around the boy and held him. Elowynn watched from 3 feet away and pressed her hand over her mouth so no one would hear the sound she made. The sheriff arrived next morning. Brackett and his men had been arrested overnight, caught fleeing toward the border with stolen cattle and a can of tar. Theodora's testimony gave the law what it needed. Brackett would face prison. His store would be seized. The sheriff tipped his hat. "Ma'am, the territorial office confirmed your homestead claim. The water rights belong to you." Elowynn held the paper and read it 3 times. Her name, her land, her water, her future, written in ink no man could forge. Weeks passed. Cale rebuilt the barn with new timber, and Elowynn worked beside him, hammering nails until her arms ached and her laughter rang across the valley. She planted a garden, squash, beans, tomatoes, and a row of purple prairie clover along the fence. Cale built a schoolroom for Nettie, who started teaching Soren his letters. On Sundays, Theodora came for supper with tamales and stories that made the children's eyes go wide. One autumn evening, the sky turned copper and violet. Cale and Elowynn sat on the porch watching fireflies. The space between them had been shrinking for months, not with grand gestures, but with coffee at dawn and hands that chose not to pull away. "I'm not good with words," Cale said quietly. "But this place was dying before you came." Elowynn's eyes filled. "You gave us a home when we had nothing to offer but ourselves." He looked at her. "That was enough," he said. "That was always enough." Years later, travelers through the valley would see a ranch with a red barn, a garden bursting with color, and a porch where an old cottonwood threw shade like a blessing. Children running between rows of clover, laughter on the wind. A man with a scar on his jaw and a woman with steady hands, standing together in the doorway. On the windowsill, there was always a purple prairie clover in a jar, always fresh, always replaced before the last one wilted. Under the cottonwood, beside 2 old graves, a wooden sign read, "The Dunmore Family, built from ashes." The wind did not howl. It sang. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to Wild West Talehouse for more stories of the frontier.